consider, in speaking along those lines of looking for a blend between fantasy and reality, looking for that sort of middle ground, realism and imagination. Consider the major characters to whom we're introduced in the opening chapters. While we're given a considerable amount of detail about their personalities, we don't really have terribly vivid mental pictures of their physical characteristics. Probably the one that we get most on is Hepzibah. We get some physical description, there's no question about that, but he's far less concerned about their physical characteristics than he is about their personality, their temperaments, their behavior. And this is an example of how Nathaniel Hawthorne wants to spend far more time in this work dealing with moral, psychological, and social traits rather than physical ones. And it underscores what he's said about the realism of novels versus the right to present truths of the writer's own choosing. He's simply less interested in the day-to-day, and he's more interested in the big T, capital T, truths of life. Well, now, obviously our first character that we're introduced to is Hepzibah, and clearly Nathaniel Hawthorne wants to make a statement here about the decline of the Pynchon family. He does a great job of it in the depicting her coming out here and getting her scent shop ready, and how it's kind of agonizing to see her go through that. But he also seems to be making through her a kind of a broader statement about families and their integration into society. When we get into the themes slide a little bit later in this presentation, we'll be talking more in depth about that theme. When she's forced to open a scent shop in her home or starve, she does what members of her family should have been doing for years, getting back into the mainstream of society. Did you notice how her chickens were dwarfed? Did you notice that? Hawthorne seems to be saying something along the lines that exclusivity is very bad for the growth or development of the person and the family. Aristocracy isn't healthy, and that's kind of what the Pynchon family is there. They're kind of an aristocracy that's declined. They've kind of dwarfed in a way. They've kind of atrophied as a family, and she's the last of the line, and the money has run out. It seems odd to see her as brave, but she is kind of brave. It took some courage for her, given her background, to humble herself and come out there now that she's not a shut-in, now that she has to have a connection to the outside world. She'll grow, and that's a good thing. We feel kind of guilty feeling sorry for somebody who's lived a life of privilege, who's been, one of the most respected members of society, to have to come out and sort of humble herself like this. We feel kind of guilty about feeling bad for her, but, we do feel bad for her. On the other hand, the character of Phoebe, often criticized by some as being a bit too stereotypically presented as the kind of idealized Victorian girl, you need to know that Hawthorne's nickname for his wife was Phoebe. Okay, this character is kind of modeled on her, and she's a little bit overly fluffy and feminine. I hate to say fluffy, but she's really, really stereotypically feminine in the Victorian sense. Hawthorne would have been considered quite progressive for his day, but by our standards, he would hardly be called a feminist. On the one hand, Hawthorne believes very much that women should have a more prominent position in society, but he was no progressive feminist, not by any stretch of the imagination, and very typical views of women's roles and in his views, women's traits and characteristics should really confine them to a particular set of roles. But on the other hand, in some ways, he is kind of remarkably progressive, especially when he is talking about women's intellect and women's ability to lead in some respects. So he's kind of an ambiguous figure in some respects. To his credit, the work is to some degree about Phoebe's maturation. So she starts off as this little girl with this kind of, rose-colored glasses view of reality, but she, through the influence especially of Holgrave, comes to see the world as being less of this kind of Disneyland fairy tale, and she starts grappling with the more serious aspects of reality, the sadder aspects of life. She has to do that to grow, to mature, to become more of a human being. And to be fair, she is a young girl. She's a teenager at the beginning of the piece, and she becomes a woman as she goes along, and that's to be expected. I mean, if it were a male character who was in his teens growing up, you would expect to see some immaturity early on and maturity later. So he does allow this character to grow. He doesn't keep her sort of emotionally and psychologically stunted at all by any stretch. It's all about her becoming more of a person. Hawthorne's narrator really identifies her biggest shortcoming as being her rather simplistic view of the world, and her development takes place because she encounters some of the more difficult aspects of life. Holgrave, dark, reclusive, a lot, frankly, like Hawthorne himself. It's hard not to see Hawthorne projecting himself. As a young man, he was terribly shy, very reclusive, spent a lot of time in the library, and in fact, he was kind of a nocturnal fellow. He didn't really go out in the daytime very much. Spent quite a period of time after he left college, just kind of living at home with his mom and just going to the library, reading, trying to find out what he wanted to do with his life. Artistic, but a very gritty, dark realist. He's a photographer in this romance. After all, it's an art form that was very new for the time, and that tries to present life as it really is. Think about that. Photography is trying to capture life as it is, the realistic verisimilitude right there. Holgrave has to change. He will change just like Phoebe will. They will change. They will influence each other. We'll talk about that when we talk about the concept of marriage and the theme in this romance and marriage later on. But he obviously has to have the light and cheerfulness that Phoebe has to offer him. That's going to change him, because without her, he's a very depressed and dark figure. He's a very realistic figure, but not a happy figure. Okay? He doesn't see the potentiality in life. He's an artist without imagination. He's an artist that's engaged in a type of art form that presents life in a very mimetic sense. It is art, but it's not art as it could be. It's art as it is. He's not imagining life as it should or could be. There's no idealist in him. It should be better than it is. And Holgrave is never going to be open to the potentialities in life unless he has someone like Phoebe to change him. So he has to change too. There's a real danger here that if he doesn't have the influence of somebody like Phoebe, that he's going to cut himself off from the rest of humanity. He is the isolato, as has been spoken of so frequently by American literary critics. That figure who's dark, brooding, by himself, cut off from society. And the danger is that he's never going to integrate back into society. He's going to be such a self-reliant character that there's danger in that. So you got to look at this and see the theme in the novel also, or the romance, that deals with self-reliance. Self-reliance can become dangerous. We see this also in Moby Dick, if you want to go into that, where we have the figure of Ahab, who is so utterly self-reliant, he's self-absorbed, that he insists that the rest of the universe revolve around him and his quest to get even with the whale. Holgrave's not quite that dark, but he's pretty dark. He's sort of self-absorbed and self-consumed, and if he doesn't break out and make a real heart-to-heart connection with another human being, he runs the danger of becoming that isolated figure that is basically self-damned. Clifford, wholly incapable of interaction with the outside world. There is just no other character in American literature like Clifford. He's the artistic temperament brought to the extreme. He's such an aesthete. He's got to be kind of fun to play if you ever put this in a film. Vincent Price was cast as Clifford. Very bad choice. I can only imagine that he's kind of a cross between, I don't know, Truman Capote and Pee Wee Herman. I don't know what to do with Clifford. He really is unlike any other character in American literature that I can think of. Maybe you can think of some. But he is just a useless guy in some respects. He's highly sensitive. He's a seeker of beauty in any form and just cannot accept reality. He's untethered from reality. He is incapable of what Hepzibah eventually brings herself to, and that is reconnecting with the world. He's a lost cause in many respects. He just needs to be sheltered and taken care of, because otherwise he's going to die. You might say he's worthless, but he's one of those creatures that you just have to take care of and provide for, because he's simply not capable of taking care of himself. It's just too late for him in many respects. The next slide we'll talk about some of the other characters, especially the villains, and explore them as well.